My neighbor reported me for putting pink flowers on my porch. He filed 12 complaints total. Then he walked into that HOA meeting with his little book, thinking they were there to talk about my front door. But I found one sentence in the bylaws that cost him $4,000. He never saw it coming. My name is Serena, I'm 34 years old, and I want to tell you about the 2 years that completely changed who I am, what I believe about people, and what I am willing to do when someone pushes me past my limit. I moved into Maplewood Creek, a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio, after my divorce from my ex-husband Derek, 38-year-old, who I later found out had been lying to me for most of our 6-year marriage. But that is a story that will find its way into this one, because everything in my life at that time was connected in ways I could not yet see. I bought my house on Crestline Drive with the settlement money, not a lot, but enough, and I was proud of it in the quiet, painful way you are proud of something you built from the ruins of something else. It was mine, fully mine, and I decorated the porch with hanging flower baskets, repainted the shutters a deep navy blue, and planted lavender along the front walkway because lavender made me feel like I was still capable of growing something beautiful. My neighbor to the right was a man named Clifton, 52-year-old, a retired contractor with silver hair, an American flag the size of a small boat hanging from his porch, and an opinion about everything. I noticed him watching me the first week I moved in, standing at his window with a coffee mug, not waving, just watching, and I told myself I was imagining it. I was not imagining it. The first HOA complaint came 6 weeks after I moved in. It was a letter in my mailbox saying my flower baskets were in violation of Section 4B of the community guidelines because the color of the flowers, specifically the pink petunias, were not on the approved palette for exterior decorations. I stood in my driveway reading that letter 3 times, certain I had misunderstood something. Because who reports pink flowers? Clifton, that is who. I found out from my other neighbor, a sweet older woman named Dottie, 67-year-old, who baked me a lemon cake the week I moved in and became the closest thing I had to a friend on that street. She told me quietly over her fence that Clifton had been the self-appointed neighborhood watchman for years, that he had driven out 2 families before me, that he kept a notebook, an actual physical notebook, where he tracked what everyone on the street was doing. I replaced the petunias with white ones and told myself to keep my head down. That was my first mistake. The second complaint came 3 weeks later. My trash bins were 2 inches outside the designated placement zone. The third complaint was about my car being parked slightly over my property line. The fourth was that my porch light was too bright and constituted light pollution under a clause buried on page 31 of the HOA handbook. By complaint number 6, I had started keeping my own records, dates, times, the exact wording of each letter, because something in my gut told me this was not about flowers or trash bins or light pollution. This was about me. Oh, me. Between complaints 7 and 8, Dottie told me something that made my stomach drop. She said that before I moved in, Clifton had made an offer on my house through a third party, a quiet back-channel offer that the previous owners had rejected, and that he had wanted to buy it to expand his property and build a workshop. He had not gotten what he wanted, and then I had appeared. A single divorced woman who had the audacity to plant lavender and hang pink flowers, and something about that had made him decide I needed to go. I sat with that information for a long time. Complaint number 9 was the one that broke something in me. It was filed the week of Thanksgiving, and it accused me of creating a noise disturbance. The noise in question was my television, which I had been watching alone in my living room at 7 p.m. while eating leftover soup. I was watching a documentary about birds. I want you to understand that. I was watching a documentary about birds and eating soup alone on Thanksgiving because I had no family nearby. My parents had passed. My marriage was over, and my sister Renee, 40-year-old, who I had once been close to, had chosen Derek's side in the divorce in a way that still made my chest ache if I thought about it too long. I called the HOA board that Friday and asked to speak with someone directly. The woman on the phone, bored and tired, told me that the complaints were anonymous and that the board simply acted on what was submitted. I asked her how many complaints one neighbor could file before the board investigated the intent behind them, and she paused for a long moment and said she did not know. That pause told me everything. I went home, made tea, and opened the HOA handbook for the first time, not to find my own violations, but to find his. I read that handbook the way you read something when you are angry enough to be patient, slowly, carefully, every footnote, every amendment, every addendum stapled to the back pages that most people never touch, and on page 47, tucked inside a section about property maintenance that had been updated in 2019, I found it. Section 11. Subsection C, paragraph 4. Any structure added to a property after January 1st, 2018 that alters the exterior footprint of the home must be approved by the HOA Architectural Committee a minimum of 90 days before construction begins. Failure to comply results in a mandatory fine of no less than $2,000 per unapproved structure, and the structure must be removed at the owner's expense within 60 days of notice. I put my tea down. I walked to my front window and looked at Clifton's property, specifically at the large wooden workshop he had built along the side of his house, the one with the weather vane on top and the double doors he was always going in and out of, the one Dottie had mentioned he built about 2 years ago, after his offer on my house fell through. I went back to my laptop and submitted a public records request to the county for Clifton's building permits. It took 8 days to get the response, and when it came, I read it 3 times the same way I had read that first HOA letter, slowly, carefully, making sure I understood. There was no permit for the workshop. There was no HOA Architectural Committee approval. There was nothing. I did not go to the HOA board right away. I want you to know that. I sat on that information for 2 weeks, because part of me still believed in proportion, in fairness, in not becoming the kind of person who burns things down. But then complaint number 10 arrived, this time about the color of my front door, which I had repainted a deep burgundy because it made me happy every time I came home. And complaint number 11 came 4 days later about a crack in my driveway that was supposedly a safety hazard, and I realized that Clifton was never going to stop. He was going to file complaints until I sold the house or gave up or disappeared, and he was going to do it with the calm confidence of someone who had never once been told no. I filed my report with the HOA on a Tuesday morning. I included photographs of the workshop, the dimensions, the date of construction based on Dottie's recollection and the county records, the absence of any permit or committee approval, and a formal citation of Section 11, subsection C, paragraph 4. I also included a neatly organized file of all 12 HOA complaint letters I had received, with a note asking the board to consider whether the volume and pattern of complaints from a single neighbor warranted investigation into intent and harassment. I sent it certified mail and kept a copy. The board met 3 weeks later. I was not invited to attend, but Dottie was friends with one of the board members, a quiet retired teacher named Harriet, 71-year-old, who called Dottie afterward and told her everything. Clifton had shown up to the meeting expecting to discuss my front door. He sat down with his arms crossed and his notebook on the table, and then Harriet had read out the complaint against him. The room went completely silent, and Clifton's face, according to Harriet, went through about 6 different emotions in 4 seconds. The fine for the unpermitted workshop was $2,000 for the structure itself and an additional $2,000 for the failure to appear before the architectural committee, totaling $4,000, due within 30 days, with a mandatory order to bring the structure into compliance or face continued monthly penalties. He also had to remove the weather vane, which I know is a small thing, but I will not pretend it did not make me smile. But here is where the story turns, because this was never really just about the HOA, and I think somewhere in the back of my mind I had always known that. 3 days after the board meeting, my sister Renee called me for the first time in 14 months. She said she had heard through a mutual friend that I had been having a hard time, and something in her voice was different, softer, uncertain, and I asked her directly why she had sided with Derek during the divorce, why she had gone to his family's Christmas and posted photos on Instagram while I was sitting alone in an empty apartment. And the silence that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said quietly that Derek had told her I had cheated first, that he had shown her text messages, that she had believed him because she had wanted an explanation that made sense. I felt the floor shift under me, because I had never cheated, not once. Not even close, and I understood in that moment that Derek had not just ended our marriage. He had built a story around it, a careful, convincing story that had cost me my sister and 2 years of my life, and I understood also that Clifton had built a story too, a story where I was the problem, the disruption, the thing that did not belong on Crestline Drive. I had been living inside other people's stories for a very long time. Renee and I talked for 3 hours that night. It was uncomfortable and raw, and neither of us said everything perfectly, but we stayed on the phone, and that mattered. We are still rebuilding, slowly, the way you rebuild something that was broken by someone else's hands, carefully checking every piece before you place it. Derek reached out 2 months later, not to apologize, but to ask if I would consider signing over a small financial account he had forgotten to include in the settlement. I forwarded his message to my attorney and did not respond personally. Clifton paid the $4,000 fine. He did not look at me for 6 weeks after that. And then one morning I was watering my lavender and he walked to his mailbox and I looked up and he looked away first and I went back to watering my flowers. I repainted my front door burgundy again the following spring, a slightly deeper shade this time, and I put the pink petunias back on the porch because I had earned the right to grow something beautiful in whatever color I chose. Dottie brought me a lemon cake to celebrate. I ate the whole thing. If you made it this far, thank you for reading. Sometimes the revenge is the fine. Sometimes it is the phone call from your sister. Sometimes it is just standing in your own driveway, watering your own flowers, in a house that is entirely and completely yours. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. Thank you.